I will never forget the day I first saw Mia. It was the start of my 3rd year in college. I was standing in line for coffee at the campus cafe when I heard her laugh. It was a sound that filled the room, drowning out the hum of music and chatter. I turned and saw her. She was standing by the counter, gracefully balancing 2 cups of coffee, chatting with someone while tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Mia was the kind of person you couldn't ignore. Her green eyes sparkled as if they reflected the morning sun. She didn't just enter a room, she took command of it. Her light scarf draped effortlessly over her shoulders, and her voice carried the kind of warmth that could make you laugh and comfort you at the same time. In that moment, I realized she had captured me. Even though Mia didn't glance my way, I knew I would find myself looking for her at every opportunity. On campus, she was a star. Not an athlete or a straight-A student, but someone whose presence was magnetic. Everyone seemed drawn to her, friends, classmates, even professors. Her kindness and openness pulled people in like moths to a flame. But one person stood closest of all, Dan. Tall, confident, with a perfect smile and a motorcycle always parked near the campus entrance. He embodied everything I wasn't: bold, carefree, unafraid to take risks. I was the one hiding in the shadows. I was reliable, calm, always ready to help, but never the center of attention. While I longed to approach Mia, ask her out, or even start a real conversation, the fear of rejection held me back. One day, while sitting on the campus lawn, I saw them together. Dan had his arm around her shoulders, whispering something, and Mia laughed like the rest of the world had vanished. I couldn't look away, a tight knot forming in my chest. For the first time, I wondered, why do some people find happiness so effortlessly while others are left watching from afar? That year, I kept trying to get closer to her, through casual encounters, group projects, or mutual friends. Sometimes, we exchanged a few words. Her voice, even in mundane conversations, felt like music. Every time she looked at me, I felt like I was getting closer to the sun. But it was never enough. Mia saw me, but only as one of many. She belonged to a different world, a world of motorcycles, speed, and Dan. By the end of the semester, I heard she had taken a job as a barista at a nearby cafe. I couldn't resist and soon became a regular customer. Every time I stepped inside, my heart raced. She greeted me with the same smile she gave every customer, but to me, it was an entire universe. I never asked for more than a cup of coffee. Never left notes or hints. I just wanted to be near her, listening to her voice as she expertly managed the line, her warmth infusing every interaction. "Do you always get a double espresso?" she asked one day, handing me my usual cup. I nodded awkwardly. "It helps me focus." Mia leaned on the counter, a playful smile on her lips. "Focus on what?" "On my dreams," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. Her laughter made me look up. "Dream bigger. You might need something stronger than coffee for that." That brief exchange stayed with me as a reminder that while I was standing still, she was moving forward. By the end of summer, I realized I was just another face in the crowd to her. But that didn't stop me. Mia was my star. Distant and unreachable, perhaps, but I held on to the hope that one day, fate might chart a different course. Mia stayed behind the counter of the same cafe where she'd worked since college. It was a quaint little place nestled on the corner of Main Street, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting out onto the sidewalk. The cafe was as much a part of Mia as she was of it. The regulars knew her by name, drawn to her warm smile and easy conversation. She made everyone feel welcome, but to me, she was so much more. I couldn't stay away from that cafe. At first, I convinced myself that I needed the caffeine to get through my long workdays, but I knew better. Every visit was a chance to see her, even if it meant just watching her move between tables or hearing her laugh from across the room. Dan was no longer in the picture, at least not physically. Word around town was that he'd left to chase his dream of professional motorcycle racing. For a while, Mia seemed more focused, throwing herself into her work and her family. But there were moments, quiet ones, when I'd catch her staring out the cafe window, her gaze distant, as if she were chasing a memory. One of those days, I found myself sitting at my usual corner table, watching her wipe down the counter after a rush. The cafe had quieted, and for a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. "Tough crowd today?" I asked as she passed by. Mia stopped and leaned against the counter with a tired smile. "Same as always. People want their coffee, and I make it happen." I couldn't help but smile. "You do more than that. You make their day." She tilted her head, a flicker of curiosity in her expression. "You're always saying the right things, Stephen. Makes me wonder if you practice them before you come in here." The tease in her voice was light, but it stayed with me for the rest of the day. Over time, our conversations became more frequent. I'd linger at the counter after ordering, asking her how her family was or what plans she had for the weekend. She was guarded at first, offering short, polite answers. But gradually she opened up. "My parents have been working extra shifts," she said one evening as she closed up the cafe. "It's tough, but they're managing. I try to help out as much as I can." "Do they ever take a break?" I asked, handing her a chair to stack. Mia shook her head with a quiet laugh. "Breaks aren't really in their vocabulary. I guess that's where I get it from." I admired her resilience, her commitment to her family. It made me want to know her even more deeply, to understand the parts of her she rarely shared. But no matter how close we became, I could see the weight she carried. Even when she smiled, there was a shadow behind her eyes, a quiet longing that never fully faded. Dan might have been gone, but he hadn't left her heart. I could tell by the way her voice softened when someone mentioned him, or the wistfulness in her gaze when motorcycles roared past the cafe. One day, as I stood at the counter waiting for my coffee, I decided to take a risk. "Mia," I said, my voice steady but nervous, "do you ever think about what you want for yourself? Not your family, not anyone else, just you?" She paused, the cup she was holding hovering midair. Her green eyes locked on mine, searching for something in my face. "I don't really have time to think about that," she said finally, her tone light but guarded. "There's too much to do." I wanted to say more, to tell her that she deserved to dream, to live for herself. But I held back. She wasn't ready to hear it. That summer, I noticed small changes. Mia worked with the same energy, but there were moments when she seemed far away, lost in her thoughts. One afternoon, she caught me watching her from across the cafe. "What?" she asked, laughing softly as she approached my table. I shook my head, embarrassed. "Nothing. Just wondering what's on your mind." Mia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing important," she said, clearing the empty plate in front of me. But as she turned away, I caught a glimpse of the truth. There was something she wasn't saying. Despite everything, I stayed. I kept coming back to the cafe, kept listening to her stories, kept hoping that one day she might see me differently. Mia was my star, beautiful, distant, and always just out of reach. Yet I couldn't help but orbit around her, drawn to her light no matter how much it hurt to stay in the shadows. Weeks turned into months, and the cafe became a second home for me. Not because I needed the caffeine or the quiet, but because of Mia. She was the constant in my day, her presence a reminder of everything I wanted but couldn't have. By now, she recognized me as more than just a regular. She greeted me with a familiar warmth, our conversations lasting longer than those with other customers. But there was always a line she wouldn't cross, a part of herself she kept locked away. One day, I arrived earlier than usual. The cafe was quiet, the morning rush not yet underway. Mia was behind the counter, arranging pastries in the display case. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she hummed softly to herself, a song I didn't recognize but one that suited her perfectly. "Good morning," I said, walking up to the counter. She looked up and smiled. "Stephen, you're here early. Big day ahead?" "Not really. Just couldn't wait for my coffee," I replied, trying to sound casual. Mia chuckled as she reached for a cup. "Let me guess, double espresso? You know me too well." As she prepared my drink, I leaned against the counter, watching her. She moved with effortless grace, her hands steady and sure. Do you ever get tired of this place? I asked suddenly. Mia paused, glancing at me over her shoulder. Tired of what? Making coffee or listening to people complain about their mornings? Neither, I said. I mean, don't you ever want more? She hesitated, the steam from the espresso machine rising between us. More? Yeah. To travel, to chase a dream, to do something just for yourself. Mia set the cup in front of me, her expression thoughtful. Dreams are nice, Stephen, but life doesn't always make room for them. Sometimes you just have to work with what you've got. I nodded, though her words saddened me. She deserved more than this small-town cafe, more than the weight she carried for her family. But I knew better than to push her. As the weeks went on, our conversations grew more personal. I learned about her childhood, her siblings, and the sacrifices her parents had made to keep their family afloat. She spoke with pride about how she helped her little brother with his homework, or stayed up late to help her mom with the bills. But there was one subject she never brought up, Dan. I didn't press her, though his absence was like a ghost in the room. She never mentioned him, but I could see traces of him in her wistful looks and the way her smile sometimes faltered. One evening, as the cafe was closing, I stayed behind to help her clean up. The day had been long, and the tiredness in her eyes tugged at something deep within me. Thanks for sticking around, she said, stacking chairs onto tables. Anytime, I replied, sweeping the floor. I like being here. She glanced at me, her expression softening. You're sweet, you know that? The words caught me off guard. I looked up, meeting her gaze. Sweet? That sounds dangerously close to nice. Mia laughed, the sound light and genuine. There's nothing wrong with being nice. Not unless you're hoping for something more, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her laughter faded, replaced by a quiet tension. Stephen, she began, her voice hesitant. You don't have to say anything. I interrupted quickly, shaking my head. I'm not trying to make things weird. I care about you, Mia. That's all. For a moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Finally, she sighed. You're a good guy, Stephen. You really are. But... There it was. The but I had been dreading. The conversation hung heavy between us as we finished cleaning. I could feel the weight of her words, though she hadn't said much at all. That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd read too much into our conversations, into her smiles and laughter. Maybe I was just a friend to her, someone she appreciated but could never truly see. But even as doubt crept in, I couldn't let go of the hope that someday, she might look at me differently. That someday, I might be more than just the guy who stayed late to help her close the cafe. For now, I would wait. Because for Mia, I would wait forever. Months passed, and life in the cafe carried on as usual, though something between Mia and me had shifted. We didn't talk as freely anymore, her laughter less frequent when I was around. I told myself I was okay with that. I tried to reach her heart, but the distance between us seemed greater than ever. Still, I couldn't stay away. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was near closing time, and the cafe was quiet. I was sitting at my usual corner table, nursing the last sips of a lukewarm espresso. Mia was wiping down the counters, her movements slower than usual. She looked tired, not just physically but emotionally, as if the weight she carried was finally becoming too much. She approached my table with a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're always the last one out, Stephen, she said, her voice soft. Maybe I just like the company, I replied, trying to lighten the mood. Mia sat down across from me, something she rarely did. Her hands were clasped together, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of a napkin. Can I ask you something? She began, her tone hesitant. Of course, I said, leaning forward. She hesitated, then looked up at me, her green eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. Why do you always come back here? Why me? The question caught me off guard, though I should have expected it. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Because you matter to me, Mia. You always have. From the first time I saw you, I knew you were special. And I guess I keep coming back because I want to be a part of your life, even if it's just as the guy who orders too much coffee. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but no words came out. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and let out a deep sigh. You're a good man, Stephen. Better than I deserve. That's not true, I said firmly. You deserve everything. And if there's any way I can help you get it, I will. The days that followed were strange. Mia seemed quieter, more contemplative, as if she was wrestling with something. Then, one evening, she called me. Hearing her voice on the other end of the line, soft and trembling, sent a jolt of both hope and fear through me. Can we meet? She asked. Of course. When? No, she said simply. We met at a park near the edge of town, the night air cool and crisp. Mia sat on a bench beneath a street lamp, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I joined her, unsure of what to say. After a long silence, she spoke. Dan's gone. He's been gone for over a year, and he's not coming back. I've waited, hoping he'd change, that he'd see what we could have had. But he's chasing his dreams, and I can't wait anymore. I stayed quiet, letting her words spill out. My family's struggling, Stephen. My parents are barely holding things together, and my little brother needs braces we can't afford. I'm trying to help, but I'm so tired. She looked at me then, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You've always been there for me. You've always cared. And I know I shouldn't ask this of you, but would you marry me? The question hit me like a freight train. For years I had dreamed of this moment, Mia asking me to be part of her life. But now, seeing the pain in her eyes, I realized this wasn't about love. It was about survival. I reached out, gently taking her hand in mine. Mia, I began, my voice steady. If you're asking because you need someone to lean on, someone to help carry the weight, then yes. I'll marry you. But I need you to be honest with me. Do you want this? Or is this just a way out? Her lips quivered, and for a moment I thought she might take back her words. But then she nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve, Stephen. But I want to try. I want to build a life with you. It wasn't the confession of love I had hoped for, but it was enough. We were married 2 months later in a small ceremony with just a handful of guests. Mia's parents were grateful, her little brother grinning from ear to ear as he hugged me after the ceremony. And Mia, she looked beautiful in her simple white dress, her hair swept back in loose curls. For a moment, standing at the altar, I allowed myself to believe that this was the start of something real. That over time, her heart might shift, and I could be the one she truly loved. The early days of our marriage were sweet but cautious. We moved into a modest house on the edge of town, and Mia worked hard to create a warm, welcoming home. We laughed over dinners, shared quiet mornings over coffee, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in her world. But late at night, when the house was silent and her breathing steady beside me, I couldn't help but wonder if Dan was still on her mind. If she ever lay awake, thinking of the life she might have had with him instead of me. I pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to focus on the life we were building together. I believed that with time, love would grow where there was once only obligation. And for a while, it seemed like it might. The first year of our marriage was like walking on a tightrope. There were moments when I felt we were building something solid, something that could last. Mia threw herself into creating a home, decorating with little touches that reflected her personality, soft pastel colors, fresh flowers on the table, framed photos of her family. She smiled more often, and sometimes I even caught her looking at me with a hint of warmth that wasn't there before. Then our daughter was born, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. The day Lily came into the world was the happiest of my life. Holding her tiny body in my arms, feeling the weight of her, the fragility and promise of a new life, it changed me. I looked at Mia, exhausted but glowing, and thought, this is it. We're a family now, Mia adored Lily from the start. She sang to her, rocked her to sleep, and marveled at every little milestone. Watching her with our daughter filled me with hope. I thought that maybe Lily was the bridge we needed, something to finally unite us in a way nothing else had. But as Lily grew, so did the shadows in Mia's eyes. She loved our daughter fiercely, but I could see the cracks in her happiness. At night, when she thought I wasn't looking, she would sit by the window, staring into the darkness, lost in thoughts she never shared. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, I found Mia in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. She didn't notice me at first, her fingers tracing the edge of a picture. When I stepped closer, I saw it was of her and Dan, taken back in college. You still think about him, don't you? I asked softly. Mia stiffened, closing the album and setting it aside. It's not what you think, she said, her voice defensive. What do I think? That I'm still in love with him. I hesitated, choosing my next words carefully. Are you? She looked at me then, her expression torn. I don't know, she whispered. I loved him once, but that feels like a lifetime ago. Now, I don't know what I feel. Her honesty stung, but I couldn't be angry with her. How could I be, when she was only trying to make sense of her own heart? I don't need you to have all the answers, I said. I just need to know you're here. With me. With Lily. Mia nodded, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. Despite the undercurrent of tension, we did our best to create a happy home. We spent weekends at the park, pushing Lily on the swings or lying on a blanket under the sun. Mia baked cookies with her, their laughter filling the kitchen as flour and chocolate chips flew everywhere. There were times when I let myself believe that we were truly happy, that whatever ghosts haunted Mia's past were finally fading. But those moments were fleeting. One day, everything began to unravel. It started innocently enough. Mia ran into an old friend while we were grocery shopping. I was pushing the cart with Lily in the seat when I saw her freeze in the middle of the aisle. Dan, she breathed. He was standing at the end of the aisle, holding a bag of chips and looking just as surprised to see her. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still exuding that easy confidence that had always set him apart. Mia walked toward him as if in a daze, and I stood there, helpless, as they exchanged awkward greetings. Dan glanced at me and Lily, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention back to Mia. It's been a long time, he said. Yeah, Mia replied, her voice shaky. The conversation was brief, but the look they shared lingered. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge. That night, Mia was quieter than usual. She busied herself with chores, avoiding my gaze. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, what she was feeling, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, while Lily played with her toys on the floor. Finally, I broke the silence. Do you want to talk about it? Mia stopped folding laundry and looked at me. Talk about what? You know what? She sighed, sitting down across from me. It was just, seeing him again brought back a lot of memories. That's all. Memories or feelings? Mia didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I'd moved on, but I guess some things are harder to let go of than I realized. Her words were like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mia, I love you. I've always loved you. But I need to know, are you still in this? With me? She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I don't want to hurt you, Stephen. I don't. But I don't know how to answer that right now. From that moment on, something shifted. Mia tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but I could see the difference. She was more distant, more preoccupied. And late at night, when she thought I was asleep, I would hear her moving around the house, restless. I wanted to believe that we could weather this storm, that Mia would choose us, me and Lily, over the pull of her past. But deep down, I feared that Dan's return had reignited something she couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, I felt like I was losing her. And I didn't know how to stop it. The first time Mia left the house after running into Dan, she told me she needed to clear her head. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day we used to spend at the park with Lily. But instead, Mia grabbed her coat and walked out the door without much explanation. I stayed behind, trying to distract Lily with cartoons and snacks, but my mind kept wandering to Mia. Where was she? And, more importantly, who was she with? When she returned a few hours later, her face was flushed, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I just went for a walk, she said before I even asked, her voice too casual. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But something about the way she avoided my gaze told me there was more to the story. The next few weeks were a blur of subtle changes. Mia began leaving the house more often, always with an excuse that sounded reasonable but didn't sit right with me. Errands that took hours. Phone calls she took in the other room. Nights when she seemed distracted, her mind miles away even when she was sitting beside me. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest, convincing myself that it was all in my head. But the truth became impossible to deny the night I found her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs putting Lily to bed, and I had no intention of invading her privacy. But when I glanced at the screen, the name that flashed up made my blood run cold. Dan. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. I could feel my pulse in my temples, the weight of suspicion finally crashing down on me. When Mia came downstairs, I tried to keep my voice steady. Dan's been calling you? Her face froze, then quickly softened into a mask of calm. It's nothing, Stephen. He just wanted to catch up. Catch up? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been seeing him, haven't you? Mia's silence was all the confirmation I needed. That night, we argued for the first time since our wedding. Not just quiet disagreements or misunderstandings, but a full-blown, raw confrontation that left us both shaken. I thought we were building something real, Mia, I said, my voice cracking. Was any of it real to you? Of course it was, she said, tears streaming down her face. I love Lily. I love our life together. But I can't just erase my past, Stephen. I've tried, and it's still there. So what? You're just going to throw everything away for him? For someone who left you behind? She flinched at my words, her hands trembling. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm confused. I didn't expect to see him again, and now everything feels complicated. Complicated? I echoed bitterly. Mia, we have a daughter. A family. That's not complicated, it's simple. You either choose us or you don't. The next few days were tense and filled with silence. Mia stayed home, avoiding her phone and trying to act like nothing had happened. But the air between us was thick with unspoken words, and every time I looked at her, all I could see was the distance growing between us. One night, as we sat on the couch in awkward silence, I finally broke. Do you still love him? I asked, my voice low. Mia didn't answer right away. She stared at her hands, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater. I don't know, she said finally. I thought those feelings were gone, but seeing him again, it brought everything back. Her honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. If you're going to keep seeing him, Mia, I need to know. I deserve to know. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt. I don't want to hurt you, Stephen. You already have, I said, the words heavier than I intended. Despite her promises to stay away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still meeting him. The signs were all there, the unexplained absences, the late-night texts, the way her mood would shift after she left the house. One evening, I decided to follow her. I hated myself for doing it, but the uncertainty was eating me alive. When she said she was going to the store, I waited a few minutes before grabbing my coat and heading out the door. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she walked into a small diner on the outskirts of town. Through the window, I saw her sit down at a booth, and a few minutes later, Dan joined her. They talked for what felt like hours. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. The way she leaned toward him, the way his hand rested on hers, it told me everything. When Mia came home that night, I didn't confront her. I didn't trust myself to speak without saying something I couldn't take back. Instead, I waited until she fell asleep, then sat in the darkness of our living room, trying to figure out what to do. I loved Mia. I always had. But I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Part of her heart would always belong to Dan. And no matter how much I wanted to fight for her, I was beginning to wonder if I was fighting a losing battle. Mia's secrecy had become the unspoken rule in our house. She stopped explaining her absences, and I stopped asking. The weight of what I'd seen, the quiet diner meetings, the lingering looks between her and Dan, pressed on me like a constant ache. But for Lily's sake, I pretended everything was fine. I went through the motions of daily life, hiding the cracks that were threatening to break everything apart. But Mia, she was changing. I saw it in the way her smile softened when she came home late, her eyes glowing with something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't joy, it was something raw, something burning. And I knew it wasn't for me. One evening, she was late again. Lily was asleep, and I sat in the living room, staring at the clock. Hours passed before the sound of the front door opening broke the silence. I turned to see Mia stepping inside, her coat damp from the rain. She froze when she saw me waiting. "You're late," I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. "There was traffic," she replied quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Traffic," I repeated, standing. "Or Dan?" Her face fell, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But instead she sighed, setting her bag down on the table. "I don't want to do this right now, Stephen." "No," I said firmly, stepping closer. "We're doing this. I've given you space, Mia. I've let you figure things out, but you're not figuring anything out, are you? You're just running back to him." Her shoulders tensed, and she finally met my gaze. "I'm not running back to him. I'm trying to understand what I'm feeling." "And what is that?" I asked, my voice rising. "What are you feeling, Mia? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like betrayal." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, the anger I hadn't seen in her before flashed in her eyes. "You think this is easy for me? Do you think I wanted this? I didn't plan for Dan to come back, Stephen. But he did, and now I'm stuck between the life I'd built and the one I thought I'd lost." I stepped back, her words cutting deep. "The life you built," I said bitterly. "That's what I am to you. Just a life you built because Dan wasn't here." "That's not fair," she said, her voice shaking. "You know that's not what I mean." "Then tell me what you mean," I demanded. "Because I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt. I can't keep pretending that I'm enough for you when I know I'm not." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she shook her head, turning away. "I can't do this right now," she said, her voice barely audible. And with that, she walked upstairs, leaving me alone in the dark. The next day, I came home early from work, hoping to talk to Mia, to find some way to salvage what was left of us. But the house was empty. Lily was still at daycare, and Mia was nowhere to be found. Her car wasn't in the driveway, and when I called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence around me heavy. I thought about the nights we had spent laughing over dinner, the mornings when she would hum as she brewed our coffee, the moments when I believed we were building something real. And now, all of it felt like a distant memory. Hours later, Mia finally returned. I heard her footsteps on the porch before the door creaked open. She stepped inside, her face pale, her hair disheveled. She froze when she saw me sitting at the table, her expression a mixture of guilt and fear. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "I went out," she said quietly, setting her keys down. "With Dan?" I pressed. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I stood, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How long, Mia? How long have you been seeing him behind my back? It's not like that." she said quickly, her voice pleading. We've just been talking. Talking? I said, my voice rising. Talking doesn't make you come home looking like this. Talking doesn't make you hide your phone. Do you even hear yourself? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, tears began streaming down her face. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you, Stephen. I swear I didn't. But you did, I said, my voice heavy with resignation. And you keep doing it. Because deep down, you've already made your choice, haven't you? Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. Not anymore. That night, Mia slept in Lily's room, and I stayed downstairs, staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. The distance between us had become a chasm, and I didn't know if it could ever be bridged. Mia was still fighting her feelings, torn between the past and the present. But for the first time, I realized that I was losing the fight for her heart. And part of me wondered if I had ever really stood a chance. The days following our confrontation felt like living in a house made of glass, fragile, transparent, and ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Mia and I barely spoke. When we did, it was about Lily, or something mundane like groceries or bills. But beneath the surface, the tension was unbearable. Lily, too young to understand what was happening, carried on with her innocent world of crayons, cartoons, and bedtime stories. But I saw the way her eyes flickered between us, the way she hugged Mia a little tighter at night, or hesitated before climbing into my lap. Children always sense when something is wrong. One evening, as I was helping Lily with her puzzles on the living room rug, Mia walked in from the kitchen. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, watching us. There was a heaviness in her gaze that I couldn't ignore. Stephen, she said quietly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Can we talk? I looked up at her, my chest tightening. Lily, why don't you go pick out a book for bedtime? I said, my voice steady. She nodded and scampered off, leaving the two of us alone. Mia sat on the couch, folding her hands in her lap. I stayed where I was, not trusting myself to sit beside her. I need to be honest with you, she began, her voice trembling. I've been seeing Dan. And it's not just talking. The air left my lungs, but I forced myself to stay calm. I know, I said evenly. I've known for weeks. Her eyes widened, guilt written all over her face. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to give you the chance to tell me yourself, I said. And because I was hoping you'd choose us instead. Tears filled her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily. I don't know why I did it, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I'd moved on, but when I saw him again, it was like all those old feelings came rushing back. I couldn't stop it. But you didn't try to, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. You let it happen, Mia. And you lied to me. To us. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I know. I did. And I hate myself for it. I stood, pacing the room as I tried to collect my thoughts. Do you love him? I asked finally, my voice raw. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. Yes, she whispered. But it's not the same as it was before. I don't even know if it's love or just nostalgia. A part of me still cares for him, but I also care about you. About Lily. I'm so torn, Stephen. Torn? I repeated, my anger finally bubbling to the surface. Mia, this isn't a decision between two ice cream flavors. This is our life. Our family. You don't get to be torn. You made vows. You made promises to me and to Lily. And you broke them. She flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. Do you even realize what this is doing to us? To her? Lily may not understand everything, but she knows something is wrong. And when she's old enough, she's going to remember the way her mother walked out on us for a man who left her once already. Mia buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her and tell her we could fix this, but I couldn't. Not anymore. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the dark ceiling and wondering how we'd gotten here. I thought about the years I had spent loving Mia, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had built around us. And now, it felt like all of it was crumbling. The next morning, Mia packed a small bag. She didn't say much, only that she needed space to think. I watched her leave, Lily clinging to my leg as the door closed behind her. "When's Mommy coming back?" Lily asked, her voice small. I knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Soon," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was the truth. Mia's absence hung over the house like a storm cloud. Days turned into weeks, and though she called to check on Lily, her voice was distant. I tried to keep things normal for our daughter, taking her to the park, reading her favorite stories at bedtime, and making her pancakes on Sundays. But every night, when the house was quiet, I felt the emptiness Mia had left behind. Then one evening, Mia showed up at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, and in her hands was the bag she had taken with her. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside, unsure of what to say. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her. I stood across from her, waiting. "I've made my decision," she said finally, her voice shaking. "And I want to be honest with you." My heart pounded in my chest, bracing for the worst. "I love Dan," she admitted. "But he's my past. You and Lily, you're my present. My future. And I want to try to fix what I've broken." Her words hung in the air, a fragile hope mixed with fear. I didn't respond right away, the weight of her confession sinking in. "I don't know if it's that simple, Mia," I said finally. "You left us. You hurt us. And I don't know if I can just move on from that." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm willing to try if you are. For Lily. For us." I stared at her, torn between the love I still felt and the pain she had caused. Could I forgive her? Could we rebuild what had been shattered? "I need time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mia nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll wait," she said. "For as long as it takes." But as I watched her leave the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that some wounds were too deep to heal. And even if we tried, the shadow of what had happened would always linger, a constant reminder of the love that had been lost and the fragile threads holding us together. Mia stayed, but it wasn't the homecoming I had hoped for. Her return filled the house with an uneasy tension. She was determined to repair what she had broken, but the pieces didn't fit the way they used to. I tried to meet her halfway, for Lily's sake more than my own. We went through the motions, family dinners, bedtime routines, quiet evenings on the couch, but there was a hollowness to it all. The shadow of Dan lingered between us, a ghost neither of us could ignore. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Mia and I sat at the kitchen table. She had made tea, a gesture she hadn't done in years. The steam curled between us, but neither of us reached for our cups. "I know it's not the same," Mia said, breaking the silence. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were overnight. But I need you to believe that I'm trying." I looked at her, searching for sincerity in her eyes. "I believe you're trying," I said. "But sometimes trying isn't enough." Her face fell, but she didn't look away. "What can I do, Stephen? Tell me. I'll do anything." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Mia. I don't know if there's anything you can do. You can't erase what happened. You can't undo the lies or the nights I spent wondering if you were coming back." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she took mine. "I never stopped caring about you," she said. "Even when I was with him. I swear, Stephen, I never stopped." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't bring the comfort she hoped they would. I pulled my hand away, standing. "I think we need time, Mia. Real time. Not just a few weeks. Maybe you should go stay with your parents for a while." Her eyes widened in shock. "You're asking me to leave again?" "I'm asking for space," I said, my voice firm but calm. "For both of us. We can't fix this if we're suffocating each other." Mia's tears began to fall, but she didn't argue. She nodded, standing slowly. "I'll pack a bag," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, Lily clung to Mia as she kissed her goodbye. "When are you coming back, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Soon, sweetheart," Mia said, her voice trembling. "Mommy just needs to take care of a few things." I watched from the doorway as Mia drove away, the car disappearing down the street. The house felt unbearably quiet without her, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Weeks passed, and life settled into a strange rhythm. Lily and I adapted to our new routine, filling our days with school drop-offs, weekend trips to the park, and movie nights. She missed Mia, and I didn't hide the truth from her. "Mommy loves you," I told her whenever she asked. "She just needs some time right now." But beneath the surface, I was grappling with my own emotions. I missed Mia, but I also resented her. I loved her, but I wasn't sure I could ever trust her again. And then, one afternoon, I received a call that shattered everything. It was Mia's mother. Her voice was frantic, her words coming in sharp bursts. "Stephen, you need to come to the hospital. There's been an accident." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "It's Mia," she said, her voice breaking. "She was with Dan. There was a motorcycle crash. Stephen, it's bad." The phone slipped from my hand, the words echoing in my head. I barely remember driving to the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. When I arrived, Mia's mother was waiting in the corridor, her face pale and streaked with tears. "She's in surgery," she said. "Dan didn't make it." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to feel, anger, sadness, relief, or something far more complicated. I sat in the waiting room, my mind racing, until a doctor finally came to speak with us. Mia survived, but just barely. The injuries were severe, and the recovery would be long and uncertain. When I was finally allowed to see her, she was pale and fragile, tubes and monitors surrounding her bed. Her eyes fluttered open when I sat beside her, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Stephen," she whispered, her voice weak. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I'm here." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry. For everything. I've made so many mistakes." I nodded, unable to speak. Her apology felt too big, too heavy to unpack in that moment. "I didn't deserve you," she continued. "I didn't deserve us." I shook my head, taking her hand gently. "You're Lily's mother. That will never change." She smiled faintly, her tears spilling onto the pillow. "Take care of her. Please." "Mia, don't." My voice broke, and I couldn't finish. "I love you," she whispered, her voice so faint I could barely hear it. Mia's body fought, but her injuries were too severe. She passed away 2 days later, leaving a void so profound I wasn't sure how to fill it. Lily was too young to fully grasp what had happened, but she felt the loss deeply. For weeks she would ask, "When's Mommy coming home?" And each time, I had to remind her that Mommy was gone, but she would always love her. I spent countless nights replaying everything in my mind, the choices, the betrayals, the love we had tried to build. Mia was gone, and so was Dan, but their story had left scars on us all. One evening, I sat with Lily in her room, reading her a bedtime story. As she drifted off to sleep, I kissed her forehead, whispering, "I love you, sweetheart." When I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, I felt the weight of the past months pressing down on me. But I also felt a flicker of something else, resolve. Mia was gone, and I couldn't change that. But I could honor her memory by giving Lily the life Mia would have wanted for her. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. A new chapter was beginning, and I would do everything in my power to make it one worth living.